What is the best way to get into real estate if you have some money but not a huge amount for down payments and things of that nature? The answer is house hacking. So, this is the best way, in my personal opinion, to get into real estate if you are nervous about the risks of real estate, or you want to learn how to make it work, or if you maybe have some money but not a lot yet. House hacking is a fabulous, fabulous way to go.
Welcome to Real Estate to Freedom, the podcast that helps you create the active life you've always wanted through passive income investments. Now, here are your hosts, Dr. Nate and Becky Lambert.
All right, welcome everyone. Those of you joining, I'm live in San Diego, California tonight, out at a real estate capital raising event. Tonight we're talking about house hacking. I'm just asking everyone that's joined already who has heard about house hacking. So I'm going to describe a little bit of what house hacking is, what it means, and then we'll talk about how you guys can apply it to make yourselves a lot of money. House hacking, in brief, is when you move into a property and you rent part of that property out. So there's a lot of different ways that you can do this. You could move into a duplex, for example, and you could rent out the other side of the duplex. The major benefit of this is that as so for example, you could live essentially rent free in the place that you're staying, because the other half of your tenant essentially could pay your rent. Your tenant could pay your rent for you. So that's, obviously, who wouldn't want to have someone else paying for their rent, right? But there's a lot of different ways this could look. So for example, my first experience with house hacking is you could even rent out a portion of your home. So my first house, I bought my first house in 2011 in Provo, Utah, when I was a professor at Brigham Young University. And what I did was I decided I wanted to finish the basement of this house. But I'm like, I didn't really have the money to do it. I didn't really have the expertise. So there was room in this basement, this unfinished basement. And so I put out some ads, and I found, I offered it to anyone who had some construction skills. The cool thing about that was I was able to get a young couple moved into the basement, even though it was unfinished. And they actually started working on the construction to finish the basement for me. Before long, again, I'm not saying you have to do this. Some people would be pretty creeped out by it, but before long, I actually had 6 people living in our house. We had quite a large house, and we had a bunch of young kids that all kind of wanted to live in the same house. And so we ended up having people working on the yard, people doing all kinds of jobs, and I would charge them rent, but then I would also pay them. So essentially they could get their rent for free if they worked at least 10 hours a week, kind of pay for so they'd have to work about 40 hours in a month. And by doing this, it was my first real estate project. And I was able to get the project done with largely, I ultimately had to hire a professional to finish it off, but I got a lot of it done through having people come move into to my house. Now I'll give you another example of when I did use this strategy. Another example was when I moved into our 9,000 square foot home in Draper in the foothills of the mountains. I was kind of looking for something I found a guest house, a house with a guest house. So the main house is about 7,000 square feet. The guest house has about 2,000 square feet. It was a really nicely finished guest house. And so what I did was I was able to rent that out for $1,400 a month. So it was pretty awesome, because I could use the sports court in the base, the whole first floor of the guest house is this massive sports court. I actually created the sports court. It was an oversized garage that I turned into a sports court. And then I rented out the upstairs to a tenant who paid $1,400, which is about, you know, about 30% of my mortgage was paid by this tenant who was living in, a small portion of the house. So that was really awesome, right? So there's so that's another example of one way that you can, of something that I did to do a house hack. Another example, while I was living in Fiji, and by the way, you can do it even as a short-term rental, right? As a short-term rental, what I did was we lived in the upstairs of this house in Fiji. We finished up this basement apartment and we actually rented out the.
Hey everyone, can you hear me? Sorry, I think when I jumped on it may have kicked Nate off. So if that's the case, I apologize. I just want to jump in and kind of tell you guys about house hacking. So I'm moving over because we're tag teaming. Nate is at a real estate conference in California, which is awesome. And I am at the park with our kids so that I could actually present this. So I'm glad you guys can hear me. My name is Becky Lambert. I am actually Nate's wife. And I want to walk you through house hacking. And the reason why I am teaching this course is because I've done it a lot. I've actually done house hacking for the last 21 years. It's kind of crazy to think that it's been that long. And in the course of 21 years, I have built a portfolio of houses, not all through house hacking, but just through the house hacking, just through the houses I have house hacked. I have created a portfolio of over $2.5 million just through the house hacking. So let's walk through what is house hacking. This is actually a really important concept for a lot of people because a lot of people ask us, I really want to get into real estate. I don't know how. Or I wanted to get into real estate, but I don't have a lot of extra money, or I'm scared to get into real estate. What's the least risky way to get into real estate? The answer is house hacking. What is the best way to get into real estate if you have some money, but not a huge amount for down payments and things of that nature? The answer is house hacking. So this is the best way, in my personal opinion, to get into real estate if you are nervous about the risks of real estate, or you want to learn how to make it work, or if you maybe have some money, but not a lot yet. House hacking is a fabulous, fabulous way to go. House hacking, guys, is the process of house hacking is when you rent out a portion of your house that you currently live in, or when you buy a house, live in it for the prescribed period of time, and then turn it into rental. Did you guys know this is all completely legal? You might think, okay, I'm going to go buy a house and I'm going to live in it for a while, but then do you have to change it over to a investment property mortgage in order to turn it into a rental property? The answer is no. The law allows for, as long as you have lived in it for at least 12 months and 1 day, you can move into a different house and convert that house into a rental. The mortgage that you took out as an owner-occupied house, the documentation just says you have to live in it for more than a year, hence the 12 months and 1 day. And make sure you do more than a year so that you're abiding by all the terms of your mortgage, but 12 months and 1 day, that's the only requirement. So that's what house hacking is. If you like the house that you're in, another way to house hack is to rent out either a bedroom in your house or the basement of your house. You can convert it to a separate unit and rent that out. That is another way to do house hacking. One of the cool things I want to tell you about myself that just kind of tells you who I am. So before I married Nate, I was a commercial lender, and I love commercial real estate. It's kind of my passion. I've been involved in, I don't remember how many hundreds of millions of dollars worth of projects in the last 13 years as the lender, obviously, but the lender has to evaluate it the same way that the investor does. Because think about it, if the bank puts in 80% of the project costs and the investor puts in 20, the bank has a lot more to lose if it doesn't work. And if the project works great, the bank only makes their interest rate of return. Whereas if the project doesn't work, the bank loses everything potentially. They try to sell the project, but if the investor couldn't make it work, typically the bank's not going to be able to either, because they're not real estate investors, they're bankers. So while I was working in my banking job, which I loved, because I got to keep my finger on the pulse of the real estate market, that's why I loved it so much. I was buying rental properties and building my personal portfolio that way. And the chief lending officer of the bank, who was a friend of mine, his name's Brady. Brady used to say, he's like, Becky, you buy houses the way that most girls buy handbags. Because I'd come into the office all excited and say, guess what? I'm under contract to buy a house. It's a really good deal. Do you want to know what these should retail for? He's like, yeah, my wife says the same thing, but it's about a purse. So yeah, I pick up houses the way most people buy handbags because purses don't generate income. Houses generate tax benefits. They generate recurring cash flow. They generate accelerated values over time, which most purses don't go up in value over time. They usually go down. So yeah, house hacking is a really, really powerful way to do it. One thing I wanted to talk about with the house hacking, there's a variety of ways to do it. There's also what's called a double house hack. I actually did do this once before I knew the term was called house hacking or double house hacking. Nate gave me verbiage to what I had just done. A double house hack is when you rent out, when you turn your current house into a rental, buy another house to live in, and then add a separate unit into that one. So like convert the basement into another unit and rent out that. So you're making rents on the first house and you're getting rents on your current house, both of which can help pay your mortgage on the current house you're in. That is called a double house hack. The one I had done right before I started dating Nate, I have a suspicion that this is the reason he wanted to date me. Okay, it's probably not, but it's still a cool story. I had bought a house that I converted into an up and down duplex and was renting out the basement. I lived in that one for a little over a year and then bought a fourplex as an owner occupied property because the most you can buy on a what's considered a single family home is a fourplex. So I took a current house, turned it into a duplex, rented out both units, bought a fourplex, lived in one unit, and got owner occupied financing on that fourplex. And from there, I ended up with six units, if that's sign language for six units with the purchase of 2 houses through owner occupied financing. The benefits of a house hack, when you live in the house, for any of you who've ever tried to buy an investment property, the banks and credit unions usually require you to put about a 20% down payment on the house. You also have to pay an investor property interest rate, which typically is anywhere from 1 to 2% higher than a owner occupied interest rate. So by the time you put down a 20% down payment and you're paying as much as 2% higher than the going rate for traditional mortgages, it's just harder to make the property pencil in general. You can find that some that pencil, but it's just a little bit harder. If you live in the house for a year and a day, you can get owner occupied down payments, which sometimes you can get those with no down payment. For example, if you are a veteran, they have VA loans with no down payment, or you can get a traditional FHA loan for as little as 3% down, which saves a lot of money. Here's some math, and I'm just going to read it to you since I can't show you the slide, unfortunately, which is really unfortunate. I'm not sure why that is. But for example, if you were to buy a house for $500,000, so $500,000, which depending on which market you're in, that might be a big house. In our particular area, that's barely a starter home around here. So if you bought that $500,000 home as owner occupied, you'd be putting in a down payment of about $15,000. You'd have an interest rate. If interest rates, for example, were 5.5%, you'd have a monthly payment of about $2,753 a month. Okay. Over the life of that loan, you will have paid $506,000 in interest and some change. Whereas if you bought the exact same house as an investment property, you'd have to put 20% down. That is $100,000. If you live in the house for a year, you put $15,000 down on this. If you buy it as an investment property, you have to put $100,000 in on it. And your interest rate is going to be closer to 7 or 7.5%. At a 7% interest rate, which is the more conservative of the two, you'd have a monthly payment of $2,661, which is only about $60 per month less than the house that you only put $15,000 down on instead of $100,000. Over the course of 30 years of the loan, the owner occupied house would be paying above and beyond the mortgage, so above and beyond the purchase price. The $500,000 is the purchase price, but just in interest and down payment, the owner occupied person is going to pay $521,000 and some change. The person who bought it as an investment property is going to pay $659,000. So it saves you about $136,000 over the life of the loan by living in the house for a year and a day. It also gives you the chance to have a place to live where somebody else is paying a good chunk of the mortgage for a year or for the next 29 years after you move out, whichever you end up being. One of the questions people often ask us is, well, can't you only do that one time? The answer is no, guys. Yeah, you can have up to 10 mortgages on your credit, guys. that are owner occupied mortgages. So you can have up to 10 rental properties, and you can, as one of them pays off, you can rotate it to another one. Or what you can do is, as the mortgage pays down, if you have one that only has like 50,000 left on it, then you can get an investment mortgage for $50,000 because it's a much lower dollar amount, and pick up another house as an owner occupied mortgage. Or sometimes you can roll a bunch of those houses into a portfolio loan, which we're not going to go into tonight. But that's another really, really cool strategy. You can have up to 10 of those. You can pick up 10 rental properties at down payments of anywhere from 3 to 5% per house. Think about that. If you have $100,000 down on one house or 15,000 on the other, what's your likely rate of return on the house that only has $15,000 as the down payment on it? It's significantly higher because you're computing your investment rate of return, your IRR. I have $15,000 into this house. What's my rate of return on my particular money? That's the power of it, is you can pick up a whole bunch more properties that way with a lot lower down payment. With the money you've got, you can roll it into a whole bunch of houses over time, as opposed to one or two here and there just because of the cost at it. Okay, so some other things I wanted to talk about with house hacking. If you're going to consider this might make you guys laugh, but I highly recommend this. If you're going to consider it, you should definitely talk to your spouse or anyone you're living with before you put renters in the basement. You laugh, but I've had people tell me, I thought they'd be fine with it. Make sure you're discussing that with your spouse if you have one. There are some great benefits if you and your spouse and or children are willing to share some space. A lot of times you can add a separate entrance into the basement and you won't even notice they're there. There's a separate kitchen, separate laundry room, bedrooms, and so they just have their space downstairs and you have your space upstairs. The other thing to check is check your city ordinances or zoning regulations. In some areas, it is forbidden to rent out a portion of your house. In other areas, you can do it as long as it's a long-term rent, but you can't do it for short-term rentals like Airbnb, VRBO. So know what laws are allowed in your particular area. And some cities, I will say, have laws on the books that you can't do it, but they do nothing to enforce it. They don't really care. Other cities have laws on the books and they are very stickler about it. So double check. You can check like Facebook, you can check Airbnb to see if there's a lot of Airbnbs in your area. If you notice in your particular area, there's almost no Airbnbs and it's a pretty busy place where a lot of people want to go, it might be because there's some ordinances that forbid it, in which case you can look at long-term rental. I know here in Utah, our legislature passed a law a few years ago that real estate investors are still cheering about. If the home is owner occupied, the city, the HOAs, the counties have absolutely no right to forbid you from renting out a portion of your house as long as it's an attached ADU. ADU means accessory dwelling unit. So if you want to rent out your basement, if you live in a portion of the house here in Utah, you have every right to do so. The city, and the HOAs, wherever you're living, cannot forbid it. Other things to keep in mind is look at things like parking. If you don't have a lot of parking, then you may want to find ways to add more parking to your area in order to be able to rent out a portion of the house if you're going to house hack when you live it. Talk about sufficient parking. Remember that with those 10 mortgages, they're not limited to 10 single family home mortgages. On a mortgage, as long as it's 4 units or less, it's considered a single family home mortgage. So you could pick up 10 fourplexes and technically pick up 40 units that are all owner occupied. Depending on the area, you might have a hard time finding 10 fourplexes you can pick up. But if you can find them in your area and they pencil, that's an awesome way to build your rental portfolio really, really quickly with not very much money as down payments. If you're going to do house hacks, we don't have time for it on this webinar, but I recommend you learn how to do long-term rentals. Learn how to do background checks, credit checks, income verification for any adult that's going to be living in the home. Determine how much of a security deposit keeps you safe to cover any damages that might happen while they're there. Things like that, how to protect your investment, how to make sure you're finding the best quality tenants. We don't have time for that tonight, but that is something Nate and I can definitely teach you. I've been doing it for 21 years, and I can tell you in 21 years, I've never had a tenant pay more than 4 days late. And on that, even that 4-day late payment, the tenant told me 2 days before it was due, hey, I'm not gonna have the money for rent. I know I have to pay the late fee. I'll be paying you on the 4th day of the month. I said, thank you for the communication. That's awesome. It's not that I'm perfect at it, but when you've been doing it as long as I have, you start to pick up an awful lot of tricks of the trade of how to find good tenants, how to screen them really well, how to write it into your contract to make sure they pay you before they pay any other debtors so that you are their top priority, how to incentivize them to pay on time or early, and how to screen out the tenants who are more likely to trash your property than the ones who are going to take great care of it. That's another long webinar. We'll do a whole nother workshop on that one in the future because that's more than an hour worth of information. But that is something you should definitely learn if you're going to rent out part of your house, is how to do it right, because house hacking is awesome, but it could be terrible if you ended up with a tenant downstairs that's trashing the house, that is really, really noisy, that's miserable to live with. So make sure you know how to do it correctly to protect yourself, but totally, totally worth it. So I actually got into house hacking on accident. I got into house hacking. I became what's called an accidental investor. I bought a house back in 2004 that was $155,000. And at the time that I bought it, it had 6 bedrooms and 3 bathrooms. And at the time I bought it, my relatives, my friends, everyone around me was telling me, "Oh, Becky, you're going to regret this. You're going to lose everything in this. Buying a house, $155,000 is just way too much to pay for a house. You're going to lose everything. I know all these people who have lost money in real estate and it's going to be a terrible investment." And I'll be honest, it kind of scared me. I thought, "Oh, what if maybe they know what they're talking about? What if I just don't?" I mean, I was barely 18 years old. I was still very wet on the nose, if you will. I didn't really know what I was doing that much, but I could do the math on the house and see that the mortgage was going to be about $850 a month. And in the area where I was buying this house, all of my friends were renting apartments or renting a room in a house, and they were all paying $300 a month in rent per room. That was pretty standard for the low end, less expensive areas. So I did the math and realized this house has 6 bedrooms. At 6 bedrooms at $300 a pop, there's a good chance I may be able to cover the mortgage even if half the house is empty. So I bought the house anyway. It has been such an wonderful investment. It has made such a difference on so many things that I have been throughout my whole career, actually. So this particular house, when I first bought it, as you did the math on there, I lived in one room, so I didn't make money on all of them. But the other 5 houses were rented out at $300 a pop, plus another $50 a month for utilities, which basically just covered utilities. So I was making $1,500 a month on this house. That was the rent coming in. My mortgage was just shy of $900 a month, and I was living for free every month. That, guys, that's how I got addicted to real estate. That was the moment I realized this is what I want to do. This is math that makes perfect sense. Have other people pay my mortgage, and I build the equity in the house, and I get to write off the tax benefits. I get the cash flow on the house, which I saved that cash flow and then rolled it into another house about a year later, a year and about 2 weeks later. So I overstayed my original projections, but sometimes the timing of house closures doesn't quite fit as quickly as you had thought. That next house I picked up was a duplex. It was an awesome deal as well. And little by little, I actually left on a mission for my church with 2 houses in my portfolio. And by the time I came back, I had enough income sitting in savings to pick up a bunch more houses. And so little by little, I picked up another house every year or close to every year for the next quite a few years. But that very first house I ever picked up, realistically, I probably should never have been able to pick it up for $155,000. The reason why it was so inexpensive is because the owners had stuck a sign in the front yard that said "for sale," and then just waited for somebody to come knock on the door and say they wanted to buy it. This house sits on a road with almost no traffic. On any given day, I usually saw 2 cars go down that street, and it was almost always people who lived on the street. There's like 4 houses on the street and no one goes down it, otherwise it dead ends. So if you live on a dead end, sticking a sign on the front of the house that says "for sale," probably not the best way to get it sold. I put in an offer on it and it went under contract, and I was thrilled about it, although I was nervous. 2 weeks later, the sellers reached out to us and offered me $20,000. "Hey, Nate's got screen sharing. Sweet. Can you pull up those slides, my love?" Whatever you did, it's magic. Anyway, 2 weeks later, the sellers called me up and offered me $20,000 to just back out of the contract. No questions asked. They're like, "We'll just pay you $20,000 to back out," which told me they had an offer in hand that was more than $20,000 above what I had offered them. And although that was tempting, I'm really glad I didn't. See that picture? That's the one we want right there. Thanks, my love. That's the first house I ever bought. Andresa Campos is on here. I met her because of when I lived in that house. So yeah, that's the first slide. Can you move to the next slide, my love? These are pictures of the house after I remodeled it. And I only put I didn't put that much remodel into it, to be honest. It only, over the course of, let's see, I've owned that house now for about 21 years. It was the first house. Nate, can you move to the next slide? I've owned it for 21 years now. I put about 25,000 of remodel into this house. So my total cost into it is 179,900, so basically 180,000. At that time, it appraised not too long ago for 300,000, or not, well, probably about 8 years ago for $300,000. And so what I did was I refinanced this particular house when it appraised for 300,000. This was a while ago. It's worth way more than that now. I refinanced it, took out $245,000, which gave me $65,000 of cash outside of the mortgage, which I then rolled into my next house hack. So this 65,000 from the first house became the down payment on the second house. Even with that cash out, that house is renting for more than what's on this slide right now. But at the time I made these slides about a year ago, it was renting for about $3,300 a month. And the mortgage expense on it after the mortgage and all expenses about $1,900, almost $2,000 a month. So it was cash flowing $1,285 a month approximately. This house is now fully paid off. It now cash flows after expenses a little over $3,000 a month. It's been one of the best investments I've ever made. So when people try to tell you, oh, don't do real estate, you're going to lose your shorts, just remember not everybody has a bad experience. So yeah, this particular house at that time was cash flowing $15,000. I think the next slide shows that. Can you go down to the next slide, Nate? So now that it's paid off, this house is cash flowing about $35,000 a year on just one house. Can you scroll to the next one? Thanks, Aubrey. She says that's amazing. Can you show them the next house? This is how I took that $65,000 we talked about and rolled it into another house that was actually already zoned and approved as an up and down duplex. But the person who listed on the MLS didn't take the time to figure that out. So it was actually an on-market deal that was a duplex, but was never listed as a duplex. It was on a street that no one goes down, again. And it was really ugly on the outside, but the inside was gorgeous. It had these vaulted ceilings, had this big open floor plan, and it already had the basement unit with a separate entrance, 3 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a bathroom in that whole separate unit, which was never listed on the MLS. That was another jackpot find. It was listed originally at $375,000, and then the realtor just left it sitting there at $375,000 for like 6 months. They never dropped the price. I came in and offered $255,000 and they took it. So I picked up this house for $255,000.
That's my girl.
Yeah, it sits on a half acre. Now it's worth more than that now. I bought this a while ago, but I remodeled the exterior of the house. Can you go to the next page, my love? I remodeled the exterior, remodeled a bunch of the interior. That's the front of the house now. That's the downstairs kitchen unit after remodel. That house is rented, the up and downstairs is rented at a little over $3,700 a month between the upstairs tenants and the downstairs tenants. Can you go to the next page, my love? So what I bought, and actually I need to revise that. I bought it for $255,000. My memory was off when I was finishing these and I was trying to find the documents. I put $68,000 of remodel into it, which felt like a lot of money at that time. So my total cost into it was $318,000. About 3 years later, it appraised for $525,000. So I refinanced the mortgage because at that point, the interest rate was 3.15%. Refinanced the mortgage so that I could take out $102,000 on this house. So do the math. How much money do I have in on the first house? None. How much money do I now have in on the second house of my own personal money? None. None of my own money. I just took it all back out to roll it into the third house. Well, this isn't in order. There's a few in the middle, but into the next house that was a 4-plex. Can you show them the next slide so you can see how the cash flow after the refinance, the cash flow of that particular house? It rents for $3,645 a month. The mortgage and the expenses are a little over $1,800 a month. So that house is cash flowing $1,800 a month or approximately $22,000 a year. It's in great condition, so it needs very little remodel or very little maintenance on it because we redid most of the whole house with that $68,000, the interior and the exterior. And most of the house was in good enough condition. It didn't really need that much remodel. This is the second or the third one in this series. This is a side-by-side duplex. I picked it up for $325,000. This particular house was listed on a classifieds ad through a local newspaper, which I've never seen anyone list a house that way before, but he listed it for $275,000. He wasn't a realtor, and he put right on there, I don't want any realtors. And I'm sure he got tons of realtors reaching out to him because that's just what happens in general. I reached out to him and told him, hey, I'm interested in buying your house. He gave me a tour of the house. I put in an offer, and then I didn't hear anything from him. And so I had my ex-husband put in an offer under his name or assigns, which is another clever trick, so that they feel like they're getting more offers. That offer was a little bit higher than my first one. He did reach out to my ex-husband and talk to my ex-husband, which, by the way, that's one of the reasons you should have a good relationship with your ex-spouse if you possibly can, because that was really helpful to have that resource at that time. He spoke to my ex-husband and was talking about how he had some concerns on the house, like the house is in good condition, but he doesn't want someone to have to move out the current tenant on the other side. And so my ex-husband said, hey, I'm going to send someone I work with that buys houses, that she's really still very interested. And so I called him back up and said, okay, that was actually my ex-husband. Here's the plan. I'd like to take you to lunch and figure out what it would take to sell me this house. I'll take you to lunch anywhere you want. Of all the places, he picked In-N-Out Burger. I took him for the cost of a burger and a fry and a drink. We had this house under contract for $325,000. Which really for a duplex in this area is unheard of. It needed some work, but his biggest concern is that he had a friend next door who's living on the left side of this duplex, or was at least at the time, and he didn't want anyone to move out that friend who was living in that side of the duplex. So I told him, sign a 3-year lease. I'm obligated to honor it. If the lease was in place before we go under contract, I'm obligated to honor it, so sign the lease. And so he signed the lease, and I bought the house, and that tenant stayed there for over 3 years. And then moved out about a year ago or so. But this particular house, can you go to the next slide, Nate? I didn't have to do that much remodel on the outside. I did remodel a fair amount of the inside. That's the inside. I put about $33,000 of remodel, which is mostly just kitchen and flooring in most of the house and paint. Right there, I had put that it's likely worth $675,000. An identical floor plan house about 4 houses away just sold for $725,000. So it's realistically probably closer to $725,000. This one I could have refinanced and taken cash out, but I did not because I didn't want to have to live in it for 12 more months to do that. In that particular case, if you take the cash out, you're agreeing to live in it for 12 more months. And I knew I was picking up another house, so I didn't. I just left the cash in on this one, but I didn't have that much cash in because I bought it as owner occupied, so it was a 3% down payment anyway. And then that $33,000 of remodel, I wasn't that concerned about. Okay, so can you show the next slide, my love? That house rents for just about $4,000 a month. My mortgage is $2,100 a month, so about $1,850 a month, or $22,000 toward my I like not working at a W-2 job fund. That's the fund for where I like to not have to go into the office every day and account to a boss. Yeah. We call that the dream life
That's
cash
right,
flow.
the dream life cash flow.
It's also could be the, I love my job, but in case something happens to my job, I've got outside income, whatever you want it to call. In our case, we call it the dream life cash flow. Because it allows us to do what we dream of doing, whatever that happens to be. This one is the one that I think made Nate fall in love with me. So I
I
bought
wrote
that
about
duplex
this in my
before.
book. I wrote about this in my book before I even met Becky, guys, because I was like, I wrote in my book, so I said, I know this is theoretically possible, but I haven't met someone who's done this. I said, because I wrote a chapter about house hacking, and I said, I would love to see someone who could buy an owner-occupied fourplex and move into one of the units and rent out all 3 of the other units. Because like Becky mentioned, this is a possibility, but I had never seen it done because most people, by the time they start getting some rentals, they start getting too hoity-toity to live in a tiny little duplex. But Becky was living like a pauper, even though she was a millionairess, and she'll tell the rest of the story.
Well, and to be specific, his book talked about how you could theoretically buy a duplex as owner occupied and then rent out after a year, rent both sides of that out, and then move into a fourplex and pick up 6 units, which is exactly what I did. This is only showing 2 units. There's 2 more next door to it. I picked up all 4 of them for about $1,220,000. And as you can see, they're kind of ugly from the front. They had this really terrible driveway, which in some parts of the United States wouldn't be a big deal. Here in Utah, we get a lot of snow. And when your driveway slopes down like that in the wintertime, no matter how much you shovel it, your car just slides. So you can't see it very well, but these little pillars that hold the front of the carport had various signs that cars had slid into home base, if you know what I'm saying, as they hit into the pillars. The house was structurally fine, but it was just definitely something that needed to be corrected because of the snowfall that we get. And this fourplex is located right at the mouth of a big canyon, right in the mouth of Big Cottonwood Canyon, which has a bunch of ski resorts in it. Very, very popular place where people really like to live, but terrible, terrible driveway. What I didn't know until after I bought the house is that all of these houses have an incredible view of the entire Salt Lake Valley at night. They're just high enough up on the hill that you can see the whole valley from the kitchen and from the living room on the upstairs unit. The realtor who listed them online didn't really have pictures of the interior. They just had these pictures of the outside of the house, and that's literally the ugliest view of the entire house. Can you scroll down to the next page, my love?
Here's all four
There's
of the
all
units.
four. When I bought it, that's what it looked like, including the weeds. It came with the weeds, yes. We put an awful lot of remodel into this particular house. And then I've been working with the city to subdivide them into 4 individually platted houses since they're side-by-side duplexes instead of as a fourplex. They are currently platted as 2 separate houses, 1 duplex and a second duplex, but they had to be sold together by the previous owner because the backyard had some shared space, a shared walkway that goes down into it, and a shared fence wall. I have since corrected both of those. I worked with the city to get it platted individually so they can all be sold individually if I ever desire to do so. Updated the kitchens, new windows, new exterior, and then those ugly carports. Since nobody wants to drive the car down the sloping driveway, we did a level pedestal parking, some stairs that go into it, and converted those carports into 2 additional bedrooms. So instead of being 2-bed, 2-bath, they're now 4-bed, 2-bath units that are all really, really pretty. This was my biggest remodel project by far. It was $328,000. Can you show them the next picture, my love?
Yeah, and Becky wanted to do this one at a time, and by this point we were engaged. I'm like, Beck, sorry, this is not how I operate. We're gonna get them all done now.
Yes,
We
he
just
did.
clunked that money in from my HELOC to make it happen.
So after $328,000, we're into this project about $1,550,000, but the final value per unit, that $585,000 is realistically probably a bit low for this particular area. In Cottonwood Heights, I was looking up about a week ago in preparation for this. 4-bedroom, 2-bathroom houses are selling for in the $600,000 to $700,000 range pretty easily. And that's for ones that haven't been updated or new at all. So those numbers are very conservative, and I left them conservative on purpose because I feel like it's really important to be honest and have integrity with people. And I want you guys to know that you can trust us. But yeah, those numbers are likely low. So if we chose to sell all 4 units, our net profit after closing cost would originally have been around $700,000, but realistically, I'm pretty sure we could net at least $1 million on that with the sell of that. Not to mention now that I'm a licensed realtor, I don't have to pay a realtor's commission, so I can save that money on it myself as well. But
Oh, yeah.
we've chosen not to sell that because we need the tax write-offs pretty badly. So we've kept it. See, that's what the house looks like after remodel. You can see the pedestal parking on the side there, the steps that come down, and then the beautiful new front buildings with each of them having their separate doorways. And then there's just a backyard. You can go down the stairs and there's a whole backyard in each unit that's separately fenced. All of them have a new updated kitchen. So yeah, it's been beautiful. Each of those houses right now are rented for $2,500 a month at least. Some of them are a bit more than that. Can you go to the next unit or next slide, my love? There's your pedestal parking and the house with the front. Okay, can you go to the next one? So our combined monthly rents are a little over $10,000 a month. Because I lived in one of the 4 units, our combined mortgage for all 4 units is less than $5,000 a month. So we're cash flowing over $5,000 a month on this house, $61,000 plus per year on just that one purchase because I lived in it for a year. Here's the other benefit to Nate. Because I was living in that house, when he and I started dating, my 3 kids that I brought into our marriage were thrilled for me to marry Nate and move into a house that wasn't a house that we intended to live in for a year and then rent out to somebody else later on. They had never had the experience of living in a house that you planned on staying for longer than a year. Their whole life, never experienced it. So they were super
So
thrilled
in other
when
words,
they asked me, they're like, is Nate going to make us move in a year? I said, nope, we're staying here long term. They were
that's
thrilled.
right. So in other words, I cured Becky of her house hacking addiction.
Well,
My
when you've got
kids,
8 kids, it's pretty hard to house hack. There aren't a lot of houses big enough for all 10 of us. Can you go to the next slide, my love? So that's on those 4 house hacks. Those are the benefits of both house hacking and just owning real estate in general. You get the cash flow from the rents. You get the debt reduction that the tenants pay your mortgage. That's very nice of them. Thank you very much. The tax benefits from depreciation on your taxes, and the value of the houses over time go up. I know there are recessions and there are little dips, but over any 10-year period of history, I have never yet found one where over a 10-year history, the value of the houses went down over that 10 years. So recognize there's little dips in the market over time, but in the long run, house values go up. Can you go to the next one? I just wanted to show you this math. This is the very first house I bought that everyone said I was going to lose my shorts on. In 2004, when I bought it, it was renting for $18.50 a month. Over time, you can see how rents have gone up significantly. And it's actually more than that now because I just converted the basement into a whole separate unit with just 3 people living there. And they're paying $18.50 a month, and then the upstairs is paying $19.50 a month. So we're higher than the rents that's shown there right now. Over the 19 years at the time that I made this slide, I haven't updated it since then, I had made about a little over $550,000 in rent. My expenses, which I do have tracks, I have tracked all of that because I'm a math nerd. I really like accounting. So I know what my expenses are. I know what I paid on the mortgage over that time period. So I've cash flowed, the rent cash flow has been about $190,000 on that house. The appraised value, with there no mortgage on it now, the 610 is really quite low. I bet it would appraise for more than that. But even if it's only 610, you've got that value. Plus I've written a bunch off on my taxes and saved me close to $25,000 on what I would have had to pay in taxes over the years. So on that one, it would have been I've made about this $155,000 purchase has turned into $825,000 over the course of time. At what point I hired a property manager? Well, I hadn't ever hired a property manager because I hadn't got educated to learn how to do it right. And most everyone I know that had property managers had bad experiences with them. And I didn't really know how to vet good ones versus bad ones, which is something Nate and I can definitely teach you now. So Nate said when he got on his knees and pleaded with the property manager.
Yeah, she's like
We were
going
married.
every
He's
night.
like,
We got 8
please.
kids. We're trying to take care of them. Like, we're trying to go on all these trips. We spend about 135 days a year in our first year together, traveling the
vacation a
world.
lot.
And I'm like, Beck, we can't keep like managing this. You gotta like hire a property manager. So
And the truth is, like, I had needed to do it for a while. The reason I hadn't is because I love people. I'm a very, very big fan of people. I like being around people. I would screen all the tenants, get to know them all personally, and a lot of them became my friends over the years. When we got married, Nate was shocked at the number of people who showed up. He's like, oh, hi to that person. Oh, she was a former tenant of mine. How about that one? Oh, a current tenant. He's like, are you friends with all your tenants? Just over time, it became that way. But when you background check and credit check them really well, you end up with some good people. Anyway, that's when I got a
Whereas
property
my
manager.
philosophy, I had never met any of my tenants except for the one that lived in my own house because I wanted to screen that person, the one in our guest house that I mentioned at the beginning. But
Yeah,
since
you
then,
want to screen her well.
Becky's converted to the hands-off ways, especially now that we found a really good property manager.
We have found some really good property managers. The one we've got, I love, and I would never go back to self-managing it. So when you find a good one, it's totally worth it. Go ahead and switch to the next slide, my love. Okay, so we talk about why invest in real estate? The cool thing is, like Nate mentioned, we spent about 130 days on vacation in the first year of our marriage. And our tenants on both of our portfolios continue to pay rent, whether we're in the United States sitting at a desk or in Morocco enjoying the world. Rent continues to come in no matter where you are. If I got really sick and passed away, those rents would continue to come in to help pay for our family expenses and take care of our family. If something happened to both Nate and I, that income would still come in. If one of us got injured and was on disability, like couldn't physically go to a job, that's okay. The income's still coming in. It's not dependent upon my ability to show up to work every day, which is why we love it. It's a legacy that our children, we might let them inherit. We might not. Depends on their work ethic at the time. We're going to play that by ear. We've kind of told our kids you're not inheriting anything so that they'll have the motivation to work hard on their own, and then we'll play it by ear and decide where we go from there. Can you go to the next slide, my love? Yeah, that's our trips in the first year of our marriage. It was awesome. I love it. It's obviously not super sustainable in the fact that we have 8 kids and we needed some parenting. The reason for that, it sounds like we were being irresponsible. The reason for that was to let our former spouses have some time with the kids and really connect and bond with them. So we'd go on a trip and they would take the kids for a while and then back and forth. So there wasn't your traditional, but these are all pictures from our first year's trips. We still spend a fair amount on vacation, of time on vacation, but it's not quite as much as it used to be. Can you just kind of scroll through the slides, my love, so they can kind of see those? But this is what makes real estate so powerful, guys. Like all of this is financed by real estate.
And
All of
passive
time
income.
freedom is through real estate. We take our kids around the world. We spent almost the whole summer in Europe with the kids. That's Morocco. That was cool. I love Morocco. That was my favorite of all the places we've been, was Morocco, riding camels into the desert. That was awesome. Real estate has so many benefits. But to me, the biggest benefit has been just the mental freedom of knowing that we're going to have income, even if I get sick, even if I end up disabled, even if something happens to my mental health and I can't keep working, we're going to have income coming in. We can travel the world and do fun stuff with our family. We can take that income and put it into charities that we're really passionate about, doing things with people that we care about. We're leaving in about a month to go to Cambodia. We have some property development projects that we're a part of in North Carolina on the beach. We're going to go for the ribbon cutting ceremony of the last few houses on that project. And then we're flying out and going to Cambodia, where we're part of a foundation that builds water wells for people who don't have water in Cambodia, and funds a school system to help the kids get educated so they can pull themselves out of poverty. You can put that money toward whatever charity makes you feel passionate. Having real estate income is not just about being more rich. It's about all the power of things you can do that bring you joy.
Can you rent out a room in your house that's furnished, and how might you find the right renters to protect yourself?
But you can rent out a room in your house. You'll want to do background check, credit check, and income verification at a minimum. You want to make sure they have clean backgrounds. You want to make sure that I have a flat in writing credit standard. If their credit score is 680 or above, their security deposit is 1 month of rent. So first, and then 1 month of rent is security deposit, and then 1 month as your first month of rent. If their credit score is between 650 and 680, I'd require 1.5 times a month of rent. And if their credit score is between 620 and 650, I require 2 times 1 month of rent as the security deposit. Anything less than that, I won't even touch, unless there's very, very extenuating circumstances, which are extremely rare. Like I've seen one of those. That I had a lady who her daughter had cancer, and so they had a bunch of medical bills that were in collections, but nothing else on her credit report was past due. And I could see that it's literally just hospitals from her daughter's cancer treatment. Yeah, I'll work with that, because that's something that's unforeseeable. She's like, I have insurance, but apparently insurance doesn't cover all of the cancer. She's like, even my out of pocket is so astronomically high that I can't make ends meet on that. I'm like, okay, that's fair. Anyway, that's another long story. If you're going to furnish the room, you could do a short-term rental if that's an option, like Airbnb or VRBO. You can list it as furnished to rent on the long-term rental. Although in my experience, when people are only renting a bedroom, they almost always have a bed of their own. Like when I listed one room as furnished, I didn't really get any additional rents for it being furnished versus not being furnished in our area. Check your area and see if it's different. But don't furnish it unless you're sure you're going to get enough rents to cover the cost of furnishing a bedroom, because typically, at least in my experience, you don't. Find the right renters, background check, credit check, income verify. I require that they have enough income to cover rent 3 times. So if your rent is $1,000 a month, they need to make at least $3,000 a month in their W-2 job or in whatever income source they have.
What if you don't want to keep moving and love your home neighborhood? Can it still be considered owner occupied if you're there 50% of the time?
No, that's called a vacation home. If you buy it as owner occupied, you have to live in it as your primary residence 100% of the time for a year and 1 day. There are a few exceptions to that, not ones we have time to go into, but this isn't one of those. You can't buy it as owner occupied and vacation there. Your lender might allow you to do it, but you got to have them document that it's a vacation home up front, not a primary residence. And there are different interest rates and down payment requirements on a vacation home. So check with your lenders on that. However, you could put renters in the basement if that's what you wanted to do, or you could put them in a room somewhere, or find another house in your neighborhood where you love and rent out the first one and live nearby. She says, I have primary residences in different states and they have to spend 6 months at each. Most of your mortgage documents will say you have to spend more than 6 months. So it has to be enough that only one of them usually classifies as a primary residence. One of them, most likely that mortgage was set up as a vacation home, which is similar. They're similar terms, but yeah.
Don's asking, how about your kids at college?
You'll
as
have to
owner
put your kid on the
occupied.
mortgage for that to classify. But yes, that's a very good way to do it. I've coached a lot of people through how to do that. So if I was going to buy a house and move my son into it, our son Hiram, for example, we'd need to put Hiram on the mortgage and classify it as owner occupied, and then Hiram would need to live in it for at least a year and 1 day. And then he can buy another one and turn that one into a rental if you wanted to. Or you can just hang on to it and send all 8 kids through college, or as might be the case. But yeah, they do have to be on the mortgage in order for it to classify as owner occupied.
But what a great way to get your kids started, right? Get them on the mortgage. You could co-sign with them and help get the house hacking started through your kids.
Make sure they're responsible kids though before you co-sign with them. I have a few kids that I would happily co-sign with and a few that I would question whether or not to do that. If they're putting the down payment in, I'll co-sign, but I wouldn't put the down payment and the co-sign.
Good
Awesome.
point.
Nice. That's exactly what I would like to do. Good job. You got this. Any other
So
questions?
guys, one of the great ways to analyze, you might be thinking, golly, I would like to upgrade my house. Maybe you're at that point where, golly, you've been stuck for the last little while with these high interest rates. You're wanting a different place. You haven't wanted to jump in because of higher interest rates. We're hoping, someone gets into office and lower interest rates go down, and then potentially you get a different house. So here's how you do it. If you want to analyze if you can use your current house as a rental, that's another way to house hack. Okay, so we're not going to go into depth tonight, but rentometer.com. So you could go in and type in your current address into this rentometer.com website, and you could see, all right, well, am I going to be able to cash flow my current residence? So rather than just selling it and pocketing some cash, why not analyze your current house as a potential house hack and see if you can rent that out and make enough rent to pay the mortgage and have a little extra for yourself, right? For your dream life income. So go in, put your address in there. Maybe, if it's okay with the zoning, you might even be able to put in a separate entrance and have 2 units, right? You want to check with the zoning on that. Sometimes it doesn't work. You want to find out how strict your city is on enforcement of that kind of stuff. Most of the time I've gotten away with it, but I have gotten nailed a time or two. So that's kind of what you do to analyze the situation. And then what you can do is, why not look for a place with maybe a guest house suite or a duplex, right? I mean,
Or something
twin
that could
home.
become a guest house suite or a duplex.
Or even something with a little bit of land, and you could build a tiny home if it's an area that, maybe you move into like a place by a lake or whatever, right? Like you find if it makes sense for like a short-term rental where you could even like build something there and maybe rent that out and pay off a lot of your future mortgage with that. So be creative. You can find really creative ways to essentially keep your mortgage payment the same between the cash flow of your former residence and then with a clever house hack, and essentially you double the size of your house, but your payment's the same. So it's pretty awesome.
Yeah, tons and tons of opportunities, guys. The definition of single family is 4 units or below. So you can live in the 4-plex, which is exactly why I did a 4-plex, because it was the max that I could do as owner occupied. Any of those units 4 or below is considered single family. And so you'll get a single family residential mortgage the same as if you bought a house that only fits one. So yeah, that's the magic of it. That's why it's so cool. Okay, I think.
Well, guys, thank you for hopping on tonight. Next Thursday, we're gonna have Edmund Fontana. He's gonna come and show you some incredible software for how to find deals. That's your next step, guys. You gotta know where the deals are and find those below market deals. So same time, same Zoom link, and Edmund's going to be running that. You're going to love what he's going to show you with the software, how to find these deals. So
Oh, I like
yeah.
you, Valerie. She says, please do more on this subject. This seems to be an easier start to house hacking. Yeah, house hacking is the easiest way to get into real estate, in my personal
It
opinion.
really is.
I did it over and over and over. Nate joked that I was a one-trick pony because I just found a trick that worked and did it over and over and over and over again. But you know what? That one trick pony, I did the math earlier, right before I didn't change the slides because I was working on taxes because, we're right up against that deadline. But I did the math on where my net worth for just the houses that I bought through house hacking. And I'm up to 3.1 million now on those houses between mortgage pay downs and values that have gone up. I'm at least at 3.1 on just the houses bought through house hacking, not the rest of my portfolio. So it's a powerful way to build your real estate portfolio, guys. It's a powerful way to build your net worth. And it's not that hard to do. When you're only putting 3 to 5% down on the house and you get owner occupied interest rates, it's a little bit more forgiving on the computing of the cash flow of the house. Like, you still need to compute it. But when you have less money in and the mortgage is less than an investment property, you've got some more wiggle room in the middle there, which in my case was the I don't know what I'm doing fund. And I was really thankful for that because it saved my bacon a handful of times when I was learning the most expensive possible way on how to do real estate. I don't recommend that route, but there is some wiggle room cushion for you in house hacking. This is the slide I really wanted you guys to see because this is powerful. Just to summarize what we're talking about. Exact same house. At owner occupied, your down payment's 15%. As an investment property, your down payment's $100,000. It's a lot easier for me to come up with $15,000 than it is to come up with $100,000, especially when you're starting out in real estate. Because of the interest rate difference, over the course of 30 years, on the owner-occupied one, you'll pay $521,359 between the down payment and the interest. On the investment property, you'll pay $658,035. So you're going to save $136,000 plus. Notice that that's more than a fifth of the cost of the house in the first place. And so this is why that's powerful. The house hacking thing is so powerful, is because you can save all that money and roll it into other properties. You can see the monthly payment is so much better because you don't have $100,000 of your money tied up in it. It's easier to make it cash flow. It's easier to make it a good investment for you in the long run. And the longer you hang on to it, the more it pays dividends. Awesome. You guys, thank you for listening.
All right, guys.
Jumping
Thanks
in and
for
learning
hopping
about my
on.
one trick, which works. That's why I did it.
That's right. And she's since expanded to many tricks. Way to go,
I've
Beck.
learned a
You
lot more
are
other
a
tricks
rock
and I'm doing them
star.
all now. But I would truly still be house hacking, except now we have 8 kids. So it's really, really hard to make a house hack work and move kids to different houses. Once you get established in schools, it's harder to do that. So if your kids are young, or if you don't have kids that need to move with you, this is a fabulous, fabulous tool to use. Oh, our 14-year-old son's already planning on it. He's already saving money to buy his first house hack. I'm excited for him.
Love it.
Thanks, everyone.
All right,
Val.
guys.
Thanks for listening to Real Estate to Freedom with Dr. Nate and Becky Lambert. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. You can download their free ebooks and workshops by visiting realestatetoFreedom.com.